This is an Island Vote 2018 election debate.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Island Vote 2018 election special. I'm Doug Geed. For the next half hour, we're going to be speaking with one of the two candidates running for U.S. Senate in our state, Chele Farley, the challenger. She is running on the Republican, conservative, and reform lines. Ms. Farley is a partner and managing director of a private equity investment firm, and she served as the New York State Republican Party's New York City finance chair. The incumbent is Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. She's running on the Democratic, Working Families, Independence, and Women's Equality lines. Now, the senator has held that post since 2009. Prior to that, she served as a member of Congress, and the senator declined News 12's invitation to debate. So since there's only one candidate here, we're going to forgo our typical debate rules, and we'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us, Ms. Farley.
Thank you, Doug. It's great to be here. First of all, I want to thank Channel 12 News for hosting this debate. I am sorry that my opponent, Kirsten Gillibrand, refused to participate. I committed to this debate right when it was announced because I believe debates are very important. Clearly, Kirsten Gillibrand doesn't agree. She has, despite her definitive declaration that she will serve out her full 6-year term, she has already flip-flopped on that promise, and that is the reason she is not here today. I got into this race because I'm frustrated and frankly a little angry at the dysfunction I see in Washington as evidenced by 2 government shutdowns. It seems like politicians fight just in order to fight. They don't want to solve the real issues at hand. While Washington fights, we lose. Do you know that New York lost over $48 billion? That's right, we send $48 billion more to Washington every year than we get back. I'm going to use my negotiating skills and fight to get that money back. To get that money back so we can improve our infrastructure, so we can fight the opioid epidemic, so we can bring more broadband access, and most importantly, so we can lower all of our taxes. One key way we can get this money back is in mass transit. Do you know that New York has 40% of all of the mass transit riders in the entire country? So you would expect that we would get 40% of the entire mass transit budget. But we don't, not even close. We get less than 16%. That difference is over $2 billion a year. Who sits on that budget? On that committee? Actually, Senator Gillibrand does, the Environment and Public Works Committee. I will bring that money back. That fare hike that you were looking at for Long Island Railroad wouldn't happen if we got that money back. Another way is I'm proposing a tax deduction for renters. Why is it that renters aren't able to deduct their rent on their federal taxes the way that homeowners can deduct their interest on their mortgage? I'm proposing $3,000 a month, $36,000 a year. It would go a long way to helping people save for a down payment on a house or to pay off their student loans. Now, Kirsten Gillibrand has proposed over 300 bills, yet only one of them has passed into law, one to rename a post office. I want to be a senator who was actually going to get things done, not just talk about it. Now, Doug, I'm happy to answer your questions.
All right. Well, question number one, just so Long Islanders get to know you a little bit better on a personal level. Where are you from, family, that sort of thing? Well,
I have lived in New York City for 28 years. I grew up outside of Boston. I am married. I'm actually married to a Democrat from a prominent New York family. Mm-hmm. His great uncle is Jim Farley, the Postmaster General. He was FDR's campaign manager. And I get asked this question all the time, is your husband going to vote for you? And yes, he will be voting for me. And we have 3 sons.
Okay. Any ties to Long Island?
I spent a lot of summers out here.
Okay. All right, let's get to some questions. As we tape this, there is a caravan of thousands of migrants headed to the Mexican border, which has kind of reignited an already huge debate on immigration. What changes need to be made to our country's immigration laws, do you think? I
think you highlighted it, Doug. I think the biggest issue here is, again, people keep talking on both sides of the aisle and nothing is getting done. We need comprehensive immigration reform. I mean, my opponent, Senator Gillibrand, there was an offer on the table to take care of the Dreamers. I mean, the Dreamers were brought here through no fault of their own, and yet she refused to go ahead and do anything about it. I mean, we just keep time and time again not solving the problem, and we need to do that once and for all.
It should be stricter. I mean, what are some ideas that should be changed in our laws?
Well, I think the thing is that we need to vet everybody that is coming in. and we absolutely need to, control people who are overstaying their visas. But I think the big issue is we've got to look at everything. This issue with the caravan is I've heard there's now a second caravan and a third caravan, and it's a real issue. I know that there was a proposal that we certainly need to do a better job of taking the people who are asking for asylum, and we certainly are not going to separate families, but we need to process their claims quickly. And then once they're processed, you have 2 weeks, and then at that point, you either receive asylum or you don't. But we've got to look at some real common sense solutions. And then the other thing is, I think we have to be willing to tweak them. What happens is the last time we had immigration reform was in the 80s. All right, and it's been too long. Things change. And one of the best things is that, we have this new NAFTA deal. And it has not been covered nearly as much because one of the proposals in there is that every 6 years it has to be relooked at. And look, I negotiate for a living, I sell companies, and whenever you sell them, a few years later, somebody always comes back to you and says, oh, I want to change Clause A. And you're like, fine, as long as we can also change Clause B. And it becomes a constant work in process. But like with the NAFTA deal, that deal was out there for 25 years, before everyone was buying everything on the internet, before Amazon.
Do you believe in a pathway to citizenship for the illegals who are here already?
I think that they cannot jump the line. I think that they could certainly register and get in line, absolutely, but everybody needs to be vetted.
Another big issue, especially on eastern Long Island, where there's lots of farms, obviously upstate lots of farms as well, is they need that labor pool from out of the country. And this is more temporary guest workers. But there is a big fear that if we go too strict with our policies, they'll lose workers, and especially in Long Island with tremendous development pressures, those farms will go away.
Absolutely, Doug. I've talked about this actually in Western New York with the dairy farmers. It is a big issue, and they're like, please, help us. And I think they feel strongly that they need the workers. They can't find anybody to do the job, and they need to have longer than the short amount of time period. And so, but like everything else, I think we should put it in place and then keep growing it, see how it works. But we need to try everything. Right now, we're doing nothing. We are simply talking, and I think the time for talk is over. We need action.
Okay, let's talk about the country's other biggest issue here, the healthcare system. You in favor of scrapping it, tweaking, fixing, leaving it as is?
Well, look, I would be in favor of only repealing it if you could replace it with something that took care of pre-existing conditions. They have to be covered. And I also think we've got to cover all of those kids under 26 being able to stay on their parents' plan. Gosh, I would have loved that. But I think we've got to take a look at it, and it's like everything else. The Cassidy plan, I've sat with Senator Cassidy, who is a doctor. He has some very good ideas. But what I absolutely am not in favor of is Medicare for all. Socialized medicine, which is what my opponent is in favor of. And it's crazy. The proposal would cost $32 trillion over 10 years. That's $3.2 trillion a year. That almost doubles the federal budget, which means your taxes and my taxes would double. It also means we'd no longer be able to have employer-based health care. There are 150 million, half of the American population is under employer-based health care. If you like your health plan, you will not be able to keep it. But even worse, if you look at countries that have actually done this, as an example, the UK. And everyone there complains that it can take a year to see a specialist. It can take a year to have surgery. We don't want that. We can't allow it. It's one of those ideas, like so many others that Senator Gillibrand comes up with, that sound good, but the actual reality doesn't work.
So you don't believe supporters of the single health care plan who say that modest tax increases will pay for this and everybody's guaranteed insurance? You don't buy that?
I don't. Just judging by what the independent counsel came up with as to how much it's going to cost.
Okay.
I don't consider doubling my taxes a modest increase.
Let's move on. There was a big debate over Brett Kavanaugh and his nomination. Had you been a member of the Senate at the time, would you have voted for him?
I would have. But most importantly, I also would have met with him. Senator Gillibrand refused to meet with him at all. And I'm like, that is your job. Frankly, it's one of your number one jobs as a senator. You need to meet with them. She wouldn't meet with him. She also wouldn't. She was quoted in September as saying she never read any of his opinions. How can you make your own opinion and judge somebody if you don't know what they stand for? But I think it was very important that he was able to speak before the Senate Judiciary Committee and that Dr. Ford spoke before the Senate Judiciary Committee. I thought she gave very compelling testimony. But the FBI then looked into it and were not able to find any corroborating witnesses that linked Judge Kavanaugh to Dr. Ford. So I think the right answer was to go ahead and confirm him, and that's what I would have done.
Do you believe her? I know it's a difficult question to answer, but do you believe Dr. Ford?
Well, I believe the FBI. I mean, so the point is not whether she was attacked. The point was she attacked by Justice Kavanaugh, and they couldn't find any evidence of that.
Did you see some critics were pointed out his demeanor in his speech and thought he was a little maybe too emotional at times? Did you see any of that, anything that was unbefitting of a Supreme Court justice?
I think so much of it is, I mean, he has been accused of something that he says emphatically didn't happen. I think a lot of people would be very upset, and I think it's a normal reaction. But I think the real thing to bear in mind in all of this is that Senator Gillibrand basically is saying you are guilty until proven innocent. No. I mean, our country is you were innocent until proven guilty. I mean, she wants due process to just go out the window. I don't want my children to be raised in that kind of environment. We need to make sure that there is a policy, and that is what the American government should be doing. You are innocent until proven guilty.
Let's talk about the kind of the social environment in the country right now. Very divisive, a lot of rhetoric, and quite frankly, there are a lot of groups, gays, minorities, that feel they're not, almost like they're not part of America anymore, that they're not valued as much, and that they are kind of put aside in a separate group. How, as senator, do you empower those people to say, no, we are all one?
Well, I am going to work for all 20 million residents of New York State. Absolutely. I think it's very important, but I want to put real common sense solutions to actually help everybody's lives. Create more jobs. 1 million people have left New York since 2010. Senator Gillibrand has been in office the entire time. And no, I don't agree with the governor that 1 million people have left because of the weather. They've left because we have the second highest tax burden of any state in the entire country in terms of personal taxes, and the absolute worst in terms of business taxes. We've got to change that. And one way to change that is to bring back all this money that we are losing every single year. And people tell me, gee, Shelley, you won't get all the $48 billion back. I'm like, you're right, I probably won't, but we'll get more of it back. And right now we are losing more every year. And a great example of this is the tax bill. Right? Senator Gillibrand said it was a bad tax bill. Look, it was good for a lot of people, but it really was tough on New York. So what I would have done is I would have negotiated and made it better. Instead, she sat on her hands and did nothing. I mean, it is crazy when the average state and local tax burden of a New Yorker is $17,000 a year, right? But we can only take off to $10,000. And so I'm like, I still want to go down there and double that number. It's only fair. It would make a huge difference. But this rent relief will make a massive difference to so many middle-class families. 4 million New Yorkers rent. Being able to take their rent off of their taxes up to $3,000 a month, $36,000 a year, would go a long way to actually getting rid of this imbalance that we have with Washington.
So you're saying allow $36,000 worth of rent to be taken off your income tax?
Yes.
So the tax plan that was just passed, the property tax deduction was limited to $10,000, something very hurtful here on Long Island. How is that going to pass?
So, well, what's interesting is that I've actually talked to a lot of senators. They think that this can get done. I mean, I thought it was a great idea, but I was a little surprised why no one else had ever come up with it. And what was very interesting is that even the senator actually said that it was a good idea. But I think there are so many high-tax states that were hurt by losing the state and local tax deduction, right? California, Illinois, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut. What do they all have in common? They're all lots of renters. So we can get all of them on board, but every state has renters. And we are talking about people who really could use this. I mean, it's a big issue. You know, I did a press conference with a lovely girl who had 4 roommates. She's 31, and the only way she could afford, to live in the city was to have all of these roommates. And I think it would make a big difference, but I haven't heard anybody yet who doesn't like the idea.
Well, something else all those states have in common is that they're all Democratic states,
yes.
And there is a cry that the president is picking on those Democratic states.
I actually think it's a little different. What we need, and Doug, is that we need a Republican who can work with the administration and, frankly, can work with the minority leader, Chuck Schumer, to get more done for New York. Right now, we're not getting anything. Right? And this actually segues into infrastructure. Right? Everyone agrees that the Gateway project desperately needs to be funded. Right? $30 billion. There's the fight over who's going to pay for it. I'm like, let New York pay for the entire thing. Just with the money that we're sending down to Washington, it's our taxpayer dollars. Let us pay for it. I mean, they say that every time one of those tunnels, goes offline for repairs, it is $100 million in lost productivity. To repair each tunnel would cost $1 billion. To build 2 new tunnels, which we desperately need, and to do the whole system would cost $30 billion. We lose that in 6 months. Let us pay for the whole thing. But I think having a new voice in there, I just don't think Senator Gillibrand cannot work with the administration. She's running for president. You know, she is one of the most vocal critics of the president. In fact, she's voted against the president's appointees more than anyone else. She was the only one to vote against General Mattis.
I just want to go back to this property tax deduction issue there. You said that if you were in the Senate, you would have fought for it. We have Peter King here on the island.
Absolutely.
A couple dozen years, and he was unable to get that taken out of the bill.
Because, unfortunately, in Congress, every vote didn't count. In Senate, every vote does count. I still don't think that issue is lost. In fact, Pete King and I were just discussing this yesterday. We were out here campaigning together, and I think we can double it, and frankly, I'd like to even go higher. But I think it desperately needs to be done. And what we'll see, and this is packed to this whole, tweaking. Let's see what the revenues actually turn out to be, in April. And let's see how people do. We will have a lot more information. I know the CBO has already just redone their statistics because it turned out the economy grew a lot faster than they thought it would. And so revenues were higher than they thought. Let's see what it is. But we cannot have documents and contracts outstanding for 20-something years. They've got to be looked at and rejiggered every few years.
I want to get back to an issue we were talking about before, the feeling that some groups in this country feel kind of on the outskirts. There's the president, obviously, who speaks his mind and is very blunt. But some of the insults against women, Carly Fiorina, look at that face, that famous comment that he made. Stormy Daniels calling her horse face. Omarosa, low-life dog. Congresswoman Waters, an extraordinarily low IQ. I know a lot of women who are supporters of the president, but there's a lot of women, and probably some watching this program, looking at you saying, how can you support a man like that in light of comments like that?
I'm asked about my position on Trump all the time, and the answer is simple. When the Trump administration's policies are good for New York, and so many of them are, right? Unemployment is at all-time lows. New York, unfortunately, still needs help. The economy is growing at a 4% growth rate. The stock market has been doing very well. I'm in favor. But when they're not, I will negotiate. Look, I frankly wish that he would choose some of his words a little differently, but I'm focused on actions as opposed to words.
Okay. Let's talk about the situation, the horrific situation in Saudi Arabia with Jamal Khashoggi. How should the U.S. respond? The Saudis we need the Saudis as allies in that region, but yet this is an incident that is going beyond all boundaries. How should our country respond?
Well, I think, Doug, we have to figure out what actually happened, right? And the Saudis are looking into that. I think it was wonderful that the Secretary of State immediately went to Saudi, and he also went to Turkey. Let's get all the information, and then we can determine what to do next. But yes, we have to take a look at it, unfortunately, in the context of what is best for the U.S. My motto was put New York first. I think we've got to look at what's going to be best for New York and what's best for the country.
So it has not been proven as of this taping, but you have doubts that the Saudi government was behind that killing?
We don't know. But back to my whole comment about innocent until proven guilty, let's actually get to the bottom of who did it. And, those people who were responsible need to be punished. Absolutely no question. But we need to know who they are.
Okay. Let's stay in the Middle East. Do you support the two-state solution? How do you think the administration is doing in their commitment to Israel?
Well, I'm so glad you brought up Israel. I think that this is amazing that Senator Gillibrand has turned her back on Israel. She was in favor of the Iran nuclear deal. I was very happy that we got out of the Iran nuclear deal. I was in Israel in May for the 70th anniversary. I was able to sit down with Ambassador Friedman, for an hour and a half and have a long conversation. But just looking at what Senator Gillibrand's views are, she voted for the Iran nuclear deal, which would effectively have given Iran nuclear weapons pointed at Israel and, frankly, at New York. She voted against the Taylor Force Act. The Taylor Force Act was created after Taylor Force was murdered on a university trip. And his father wanted to make sure that his death was not in vain. And so it stops American taxpayer dollars to going to the families of terrorists. Senator Gillibrand sponsored the anti-BDS legislation, which I absolutely support. But then she took her name off the legislation. I mean, who takes their name off legislation that they actually draft? She has been a big, backer and proponent of Linda Sarsour, Linda Sarsour, unfortunately, is a disciple of Louis Farrakhan. Yes, the Louis Farrakhan who said, "I'm not anti-Semite, I'm anti-termite." I condemned those remarks. I don't understand why Senator Gillibrand aligns herself with Linda Sarsour, but I think we need to have a strong relationship with Israel, and I will make sure that, New York, which is home to 2 million Jews, is a supporter of Israel.
Did you support the move of our embassy to Jerusalem?
Absolutely, yes, I did, and it was interesting. I have a good story about this. So I talked to Ambassador Friedman about how that happened, and of course he's from here in Long Island, and he said, I said, why is it that this president was the first and only president who actually got it done after they all kept saying that they would move it? And he said, well, actually, it was pretty simple. Everyone kept saying that it would take 10 years, i.e. it would not be in whatever president's administration, and it would cost $1 billion, and people said, well, that's ridiculous. And Ambassador Friedman said, we have a consulate already in Jerusalem. Why don't we just slap the word embassy on it and call it a day? And that's actually what they ended up doing. It ended up costing $400,000, and it was open in a matter of weeks. And that is the kind of outside-the-box, non-career politician thinking that I think we need more of in Washington.
Okay, let's switch gears here. I want to talk about climate change. A new report from scientists around the world said basically we have 10 years to do something before there's cataclysmic results to our climate. And there's a perception that your party's reluctant to do anything. In fact, go the other way and appease business more than protecting the environment. How do you respond to that?
Well, Doug, I think it's interesting that when you actually look at this, so the U.S. got out of the Paris Accords. However, they actually did a study seeing who was produced the most, who lowered their carbon emissions the most. And the United States lowered them the most. In fact, they were the only ones who actually met the goals of the Paris Climate Accords. We reduced ours by 0.5 percentage point. But we keep talking about this. It is not American climate change. It's global climate change. The biggest polluters are China and India. And we have got to do everything we can to make sure that their pollution stops. But we are, we feel strongly about the environment, but we've got to balance that off to make sure that, it still makes economic sense.
Let's talk about gun control. Our country's laws, do they need to be tweaked, changed?
Well, New York already has the toughest, gun laws in the country. So I don't think we need to do anything else here.
In light of all the mass shootings and so forth, there's cry after cry after cry after each of these incidents for movement in Washington, yet nothing happens.
Absolutely. And I think that we certainly have to ban bump stocks. And I do think we need to raise the minimum age to be 21 across the board.
Okay. This special counsel investigation, your thoughts on that? The president calls it a witch hunt.
Well, I think it's like, I'm a business person, and I have never done anything where I didn't have a budget and with a certain amount of time and a certain amount of money. I think, going forward, it would make sense for these special counsels to have that. And then if you need more time or money, that's fine. You come back, but you explain it. I think it appears that they are wrapping up, and I think that will be a good thing.
Okay. An issue very big here in Long Island, as you know, is MS-13. We brought the president here to talk about that. What are your thoughts on how we continue the fight on this gang? Absolutely.
We've got to continue the fight. I mean, I was amazed that my opponent, Senator Gillibrand, wants to, abolish ICE. We cannot abolish ICE. We need to have more law enforcement, not less law enforcement. Whenever I talk to them, they say it is so supportive that ICE was the group that took 796 members of the brutal MS-13 gang off the streets last year. I mean, this is the gang that's using knives and machetes to hack to death our teenagers. We don't want that to happen. We have got to make sure that we protect our citizens.
Okay. We're closing in on your closing statement time. A couple of very quick questions. Gays in the military. Support that? Don't support that?
I think it's the law of the land, so I think that we should continue.
Okay. Pro-life, pro-choice, where are you?
I am pro-choice. I believe in a woman's right to choose. However, I would have signed the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, which prohibits abortion after 5 months. I don't believe in partial birth or late-term abortion.
Okay. And lastly, on Senator Gillibrand, is there anything about her that you support, that you commend, that you give her credit for?
Absolutely. I think that she's done a wonderful job with promoting women's rights, and I'm absolutely supportive of that. But we have to make sure that there is due process, and that's very important. But the one thing that I also do want to talk about is term limits. I feel strongly that 2 terms, 12 years.
2 terms in the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I've been very public about this. I will only serve 2 terms.
Okay. How about on the House side? 6 terms, 12 also on that side, or?
It would make sense that it should be equitable.
Okay. And one more time, we do want to point out that we did offer to have Senator Gillibrand here as part of the debate, and she declined. Okay, so we go now to closing statements. And Ms. Farley, you have 1 minute.
Absolutely. I live in New York with my family, unlike Senator Gillibrand, who has been in D.C. for the last 12 years. And during that time, she's put forward over 300 bills, but only a single one has passed into law to rename a post office. New York deserves better. I will use my negotiating skills to get back the $48 billion that we lose, to improve our infrastructure, to lower our taxes, to get a tax deduction for renters who so desperately need it. I will make sure that ICE is able to continue to do its job to protect us, and I will always stand strong with Israel. During the 12 years that Senator Gillibrand has been in Washington, New York has lost 1 million people. Our upstate economy is in shambles. Our Long Island Railroad is a disaster. Our health care costs keep going up, our taxes keep going up, and our infrastructure gets worse and worse. I believe strongly in term limits. I've already said 2 terms, 12 years. Senator Gillibrand has had her 12 years. It is time for someone new to get in there, somebody who will put New York first and isn't interested in their own run for president. I'm Chele Farley. I want to be that senator, and I ask for your vote.
All right. Just heard from Chele Farley, the Republican candidate for U.S. Senate. We appreciate you coming in. A reminder for our viewers here, Election Day is next Tuesday. It's November 6th. Please be sure to go out and make your vote count. This debate is available to view in its entirety online at News12.com. You can also watch it on the Optimum Channel 612 or on the News12 app on Altice One. Also on Roku, Apple TV, or Fire TV apps. I'm Doug Geed. Thanks for watching this election special here on News 12 Long Island.